It's time to go over a UFC pay-per-view. UFC 275 is this weekend. There's also Road to the UFC, but I had a look at the Road to UFC stuff and was like, I just don't remotely know enough about these fighters and do not remotely have enough time to really do the amount of research that would allow me to actually get a good handle on what's going on. So I'm just going to leave it at it's happening. There is some possibly interesting action fights, but at the same time, I'm really not sure that there's any fighters that are really difference makers in the UFC. Like, it's a lot of people who I don't really think would have been signed under other circumstances. So it's kind of like a season of the Ultimate Fighter. Otherwise, we got news. Well, not really even really news, but Tim Kennedy did an interview with Morning Combat, talked about the whole why there's not a union there's not a fighters union, why it's unlikely. It's a good bit of it would be a better interview if it wasn't for the fact that I have exceedingly little faith that Tim Kennedy would tell the truth. Or would it's hard to say this because the thing is that I don't necessarily know that Tim Kennedy isn't telling the truth, unlike anything he says. But like Tim Kennedy has some theories, some thoughts about fighting, life, history that aren't really backed up by like any common like accepted theories. So it's kind of one of those things like how credible is the source? But he was a guy who was on the front lines of like fighter unions, did fight for the UFC, and might have some insight on it. And it was interesting, but I'm not going to state anything he said is fact. But essentially, it boils down to it really suggests that we're not going to see a fighters union for quite some time because, frankly, to get the numbers to sign on for it, you're dealing with a lot of people who, let us be honest, the vaccine mandate in the United States and other places has kind of revealed a certain level of conservatism in the MMA core, if you were unaware of it, and a certain level of conspiratorial theories on the matter, and a willingness to believe things that fit a narrative. And you have also the UFC's kind of obvious anti-union bias. And I know there are people that'll say, no. There are fighters that have spoken out about it. They're still on the roster. They're still booked. But there are a lot of examples of guys who have had their matchmaking affected, been put on the shelf, been cut straight up. Leslie Smith is the most notable example of this, where she was she was let go from her contract for what, compared to what other people have to do to get cut, was very suspicious. And she was, of course, a leader of the Project Spearhead movement. And yeah, I don't know. It's nothing I didn't know before, but like it was an interesting interview. I do recommend checking it out. And also, we had Dana White say to TSN, which is the Canadian sports channel, that chances are essentially that we're not coming back to Canada until the vaccine mandate is lifted. So, again, not surprising. There's a lot of people who are trying to present this as kind of like this, like, see, we got you now. You got a vaccine mandate, so you lose the UFC. Here's the thing. Canada never got a tremendously large number of UFC fights. Our economies in the cities that tended to get those, Toronto, Vancouver, Montreal, are really not based on big event tourism. So it doesn't really matter. Like, and here's the other thing. We're going to Singapore this weekend for the UFC. It is a country with a vaccine mandate plus isolation rules. And they went there. They went there because presumably, and I don't have confirmation of this, but there are generally reports that the government of Singapore did pay a substantial amount of money to make this event happen. And it's the same in Abu Dhabi with Fight Island, because that's a country that also has a vaccine mandate. It's just that, one, it's a government that, let's be honest, is willing to waive just about anything. And two, a government that is also willing to pay a lot of money. So, in a sense, what this means is that if you have a vaccine mandate, which is going to make it more difficult for us to hold a card because we have a lot of unvaccinated fighters, and we have to think about that for the matchmaking, and we have to fit that into the flow of things. And finding late replacements might be a little bit more difficult because, again, we have a lot of unvaccinated fighters, and you're not going to pay us a lot of money. We're not going to come to your country. And that's honestly not terribly different than what it was before. The UFC has learned, honestly, that it can deal without crowds for a large part. See the Apex shows that have been quite profitable despite not actually having a particularly large crowd and for a long time actually having no fans. The ESPN TV deal is just, in short, it's enough. Like, people are like, they're self-sustaining. But here's the thing. What happens if they stop drawing viewers and the ESPN TV deal goes away? Like, are they self-sustaining? No, they are sustaining themselves off of TV deals and other things that are positionally being great live sports. But anyways, that's enough of the non-fight talk, the behind the curtain stuff. Let's get to the card. This is a pretty good card. We got a 12 fight card, and I mean the top 4 fights, the top third of the card. Very good. Very, very good. Interesting fights, relevant fights, and obviously 2 title fights in the mix there. Granted, the Shevchenko-Santos fight has problems. It has the Valentina problem of even the other world's best flyweights, which Talia Santos is definitely among. She's 19-1. She has beaten JoJo Calderwood. She has beaten Roxanne Modafferi, Molly McCann, Jillian Robertson. The loss to Maria Borello is a bit of a problem, but we can chalk that up to a bit of UFC nerves. Like, she is a very good fighter. It's just, I've always said this, Valentina Shevchenko is the top peak of like a mountain that dives straight down, and that's the rest of the division. And it's a shame because the division has a lot of up-and-coming stars. Actually, has one of the more interesting talent pools around. Macy Barber, Miranda Maverick, Aaron Blanchfield, JJ Aldridge, Alexa Grasso, Viviana Rougeau. There's a lot of good stuff there. Like, legitimately very good stuff. It's just finding someone to challenge the absolute top is a bit of a problem. It's kind of like GSP in the welterweight division some time ago, where like welterweight was legitimately one of the most stacked divisions in the UFC. But from a title standpoint, there wasn't a ton of interesting stuff. We got to the point where like Dan Hardy's getting a title shot, or like for the longest time, it's like I was like, John Fitch should get a title shot. Why? You think he's going to beat GSP? No, but I don't think anyone's going to be, and Fitch has earned it. So we're kind of in that same sort of position at this point. So let's get into the main event: Glover Teixeira versus Yuri Procházka. Obviously excited for this fight. Honestly didn't think I'd see the day when Glover Teixeira would be the UFC 205 champion. So that in itself, very cool to see him defending the belt at, I want to say 42 years of age. 42 years of age, 7 months and 2 weeks. There you go. And for a long time, I honestly didn't think that I'd see Yuri Procházka as a title contender. When he was coming up for a long time, it just seemed like it was such a risky style, such a defensively lapsed style that while he would certainly win fights and win big fights and win very interesting fights and be respected as a dynamic, dangerous fighter, I didn't think he would ever find like the consistency to actually get to this point. And yet, here we are. Granted, somewhat rushed. I think this is his third UFC fight. I want to say there was the Volkan Oezdemir and Dominic Reyes fights. Yeah, I'm correct on that. As my phone goes off. So yeah, I mean, he's definitely been brushed here to a certain degree, but like that, even that is interesting because the UFC has actually gotten behind someone, is seemingly trying to make a star out of them and trying to capitalize on their popularity. Something that they've been remarkably reticent for a, fight promotion to actually do. It's been one of my big critiques of this company for a long time, is that they really don't seem to actually have an interest in making stars because they go out of their way to basically be like, no. You must promote yourself. And they're actually, strap the rocket to Procházka, which is really interesting. For the fight itself, Glover is the better technical fighter in this fight, and that is his possibility of victory. He has a more put together boxing game. He is a better grappler. He is a better wrestler on a technical level. And of course, Procházka has all the physical tools that you could want. Exceedingly explosive, powerful, fast, and he does pair that with a very, very good chin, which he absolutely does need because, my lord, is he open to getting cracked. His aggressive striking style is definitely something that I see him getting knocked at some point. The problem is that do I see Glover Teixeira doing it? A guy who is going to be the slower fighter, the less explosive fighter. And also, let's be honest here, I would be remiss if I didn't talk, after talking about Yuri's defensive liabilities, if I didn't mention that Glover has been hurt at the start of a lot of his fights. And that is a major concern. Like, does Glover come out here in the first round and just get instantly slept? It's on the table. It really is, because he's been hurt a number of times. He was hurt against Thiago Santos. He was hurt against, let's see here, Thiago Santos. Like I said, Anthony Smith had him hurt a little bit at the beginning, and he came back and pounded him out there. So, I mean, he's got definitely recuperability. He is kind of like an Eddie Alvarez to a degree. I remember making this breakdown when Conor McGregor fought Eddie Alvarez, where essentially what it came down to is that, well, I definitely saw ways that Alvarez could win and ways that he is a better fighter. This applies to Glover Teixeira. The fact that he tends to get hurt early, and well, he recovers and does very well. It's very alarming to think someone with the power of Yuri Procházka does not at some point just melt him. So, not the longest breakdown of a main event, especially one that is particularly important and one that I am really, really looking forward to. But the dynamic does feel fairly clear. If Glover can avoid getting hurt, or when he does get hurt, suck Procházka into a grappling game, I have faith that he can win. I have faith that he can control him. I have faith that he can submit him, or that he can pound him out, because Procházka will provide those openings. He will be open to getting beat like that. But I have a hard time thinking about Glover doing that and surviving the power, the explosiveness, the lethality that Procházka inherently brings to the table. And that is why I am going to go with Yuri Procházka to win this fight by knockout. I would expect first or second round. I think as the fight goes on longer, I think that plays into Glover's wheelhouse, because the way Procházka moves can be quite draining. He's not exactly the most conventional offensive fighter. He doesn't do things in the way that are like energy efficient necessarily. And as a result, I could totally see him just fading a little bit and letting Glover into this fight later on. Glover probably winning by submission or TKO, ground and pound, like I said. But I am going to have to go with Yuri. If you're picking Glover, I absolutely can't disagree with that. There is open. The door is open. It's not a definitive fight in any way. But if you have a history of getting hurt in the fight early, I don't really like your chances against Procházka, because I just see him hurting you and then finishing you, unlike other people. So there you go. Betting odds. Glover's are respectable. It's respectable, actually. I was expecting the odds to get kind of wide here, and I'm happy to see like plus 170 and minus 200. That does feel about right. It does make it a little bit of a pick-em fight. Just a second here while I find my cell phone and put it on mute. Someone is trying to get my attention. I don't want to deal with them right now. There we go. I should do that before every podcast. My apologies. And here comes the sniffles. Still dealing with that. All right, Valentina Shevchenko versus Talia Santos. I kind of broke this down already. I enjoy Valentina Shevchenko's fights, and I know that makes me a bit weird. I know a lot of people actually don't. Now, to be clear, I don't enjoy them in a vacuum. It's that as a palate cleanser between two action fights, which we are actually supposed to get here because Glover and Yuri, Joanna versus Weili Zhang, going to be great fights. So, like, I could easily take in the middle here and watch technical brilliance and domination and destruction, and without really a problem. Picking Shevchenko, the method is a little bit less clear because, I mean, Shevchenko is quite happy to just embarrass you for 5 minutes or for 5 rounds. And Santos hasn't been finished. I don't think that there's anything that says that she can't be finished. I think she has some defensive holes and some defensive lapses. I also think she's somewhat reliant on physicality to make her game work. And that is probably the big problem, is that anyone who comes in expecting to have a physicality advantage against Shevchenko is in for a rather rude awakening. Is in for going in there and feeling, I don't want to say helpless is necessarily the right word for it, but pretty damn close. Because we've seen some absolute dynamos of physicality go in there with Shevchenko, and it's just not really worked. Jessica Andrade, a good example of that. Liz Carmouche, to a certain degree. Jessica Ai certainly is someone who's used to having physicality, although probably not on the level of Santos. She has been finishing people lately. Since the Jennifer Maia fight, there does seem to be somewhat more of an eagerness to Valentina to actually finish the fight. So I will say that she finishes, let's say, probably like a 3rd round TKO for Valentina Shevchenko. I think honestly, like, Jennifer Maia was somewhat the perfect way to actually fight Valentina in some ways. Not that she could actually win, but that she fought in a way that did not emphasize her own physicality and tried to neutralize Valentina's physicality, which is something Jennifer Maia has been doing for years, honestly, when she fights people. And it's something that I don't think Taila Santos can really build off of or really do, because she is the physical specimen. And the problem with being a physical specimen is you seldom actually face people who are going to, in the cage, just kind of nullify, just say, no. Your physicality doesn't actually matter because my physicality is what matters. And that's what Valentina does to people. So, yeah, Valentina Shevchenko, she's a minus 630 favorite, plus 450 on Santos. It's a title fight, so you feel like that's too wide. But it feels about right. Weili Zhang, Jędrzejczyk. A rematch that has been many months in the making. They met back in March of 2020. Fight of the Year candidate. I can't remember if it won Fight of the Year. Maybe it did. And Weili won. So here's my take on this going into this, is that the fight isn't tremendously different from what it was. It's not like we've had enough time for these two to really significantly change their skill sets. But I like Joanna's approach to the fight better. And this tends to be the case in a rematch off of a loss. Joanna seems to have finally stopped making excuses for her losses and is looking to get better. Because you'll remember, like, when she lost to Thug Rose, there was a lot of denial of the fact, not I didn't lose the fight or whatever, but like there was a lot of this went wrong. And I'm not saying any of that is untrue. This is the classic MMA fighters are seldom 100% going into a fight. There's a little injury here. There's a little bit of problem in the prep for the camp, etc. There's something that surprises them maybe. But the fact of the matter is that very seldom are you going to compete at 100%. That's the thing. So when you win, you're seldom at 100%. When you lose, you're seldom at 100%. So you have to realize, okay, what can I learn from this? What can I do better? What can I be better off of every loss? You can't just be like, well, there's this minor X factor that worked against me that ended up being a key. Like it just doesn't work. It's I talked about this a lot. It's kind of like the I've lost a couple of fights, I'm going to drop weight, and that's going to solve everything. And it seldom does. I mean, every so often it does. Like there are fighters that are clearly actually at a size disadvantage. I'm trying to think of like a really really good example of this. Someone who stands out as someone who just honestly needed to correct their weight class. Maybe like a Joe Benavidez. Like a lot of his losses at bantamweight did kind of come down to you're just not big enough. But at the same time, he actually ended up in more or less the same position at flyweight as he did at bantamweight. Like he was like always a bridesmaid at bantamweight, and then he was always a bridesmaid at flyweight. So actually, even that really wasn't a fix. Anyways, to the fight. I do think Joanna is a little bit better of a striker when she doesn't get lost in emotion, in combat rage, maybe is the word. And she seems calmer now. Like the edge is still there. The fundamental Joanna champion personality is there. But it does seem like she's really taking this kind of seriously and trying to adapt new ways to approach this fight. It's why it's one of those rematches where, like, granted, a lot of rematches surprise us. They go the way of the fighter that lost the first fight a surprisingly large amount of the time. But normally there's a reason for it, and this is kind of that reason. I can't. I'm feeling good about it. I can't really explain it. Like there's nothing tactical or technical that I know has changed that makes me think this. But Weili Zhang, I think, is in the completely opposite camp, where she seems to be dwelling on the fact that she beat, air quotes, Thug Rose, and hasn't really come to peace with that terms. So that puts them in completely Joanna, positive headspace. Weili, negative headspace. And to me, that kind of is the thing. We've never really seen Joanna off of a long-term layoff. So it'll be interesting to see what she can do. What has been her longest layoff between fights? Has she ever had 7 months? 7 months. So about 7 to 8 months has been like her 6 to 8 months has been her normal forte, her normal turnaround time. And well, all right, the Michelle Watterson fight was an example of a somewhat long layoff. That was 10 months. But that's the longest layoff she's ever had. So I'm kind of intrigued to see what she can do. Like with some time to retool her game, redevelop. Yes, there is the possibility of ring rust, but ring rust tends to be fighters who I don't want to say are not dedicated, because I think any fighter at this level is dedicated. Like I think that's like the closest would be like Henry Cejudo's weight problems back in the day, being like undedicated. But like I think I don't want to say undedicated, but like someone who maybe slips out of a fighter mindset, a iron sharpens iron mindset. I don't really think that is Joanna. I think actually time off will have done her well. I think she'll come back with better skills, a finer tuned game for dealing with Weili. And the fact that Weili does seem to be kind of dwelling on that last loss, and in a bad way. It's not like she's dwelling on like I must improve. Seems like she's dwelling on the fact that she got robbed. Usually that's not a good mindset to be in. So I am going with Joanna. I'm going by decision. I also think the fact that this is a 3-round fight versus a 5-round fight does help Joanna, because I think Weili does build as the fight goes on. She does become stronger. Cardio is a weapon for her against virtually anybody. And it's not that Joanna has bad cardio by any means. She's perfectly fine. I think we've seen her in 5-round fights do immensely well. I just think that Weili is a very is a massive cardio machine. So yeah, I'm gonna go with Joanna by decision. Rodrigo Bontorin versus Manel Kape. I'm going with the underdog here. Actually, what were the odds? Because I'm actually really intrigued to know what the odds of Zhang versus. So Zhang is the favorite, minus 165, plus 140 slight underdog for Joanna. So close. So I'm going. That's my first dog. Here's my second dog: Rodrigo Bontorin versus Manel Kape. Here's the problem with Manel Kape, and it's not a unique thought to me. It's not remotely something that. Actually, I'm going to be interesting. I want to put some UFC stats to this one. UFC stats, Manel Kape, please. And I'll contrast this with Bontorin and his last opponent, Zhumagulov. There we go. So 6 strikes per minute. He's under 5. Now, Bontorin is also very low on this regard, but Bontorin is also like more of a grappler. And then like you have like 4 strikes per minute for Zhalga Zhumagulov. And then if I pull up Jeff Molina, who's kind of a high one, it's like 7.25. What I'm getting at here is that Manel Kape has a very has a pretty slow-paced style. There will be sprints, there will be spurts, but there's also like a lot of inactivity to his game that I just think that flyweight inherently punishes. Now, Bontorin, you might be thinking, well, Bontorin is a super low-paced fighter, and you're correct. But Bontorin, I think, will step up his pace in those moments of inaction. That reset that Kape has, that he constantly has, that's when Bontorin can pressure. That's when Bontorin can look for takedowns. That's when Bontorin can look for power shots because he is a very heavy puncher, even if he isn't throwing a lot. And he can kind of take this over. Like, I want Manel Kape to do well. He's from a part of the world, Angola and Portugal, that doesn't see a ton of success, doesn't see a ton of MMA success, and particularly in the case of Angola, like just success period. So like there's an inherent like rootability for him. And he did very, very well on the Japanese MMA scene. Like the hype for him coming over was legitimate, and there is a dynamic finisher in there. There is a lot of lethality. I just think that at no point has he really shown a flyweight game. And the problem is that while Bontorin doesn't really show a flyweight game, Bontorin at least has a power grappling and control game to at least insulate the fact that he fights at a slow pace. Kape does not have that. And like I am just immensely worried that Kape is just going to kind of get smothered in this fight. I'm actually hoping I'm wrong because like I think Kape winning this fight is way more exciting. I think anytime Kape wins, we're going to enjoy it as fans. There's that underdog story like I was talking about, but the fights themselves are going to be exciting because he's very dynamic, very, very creative with his strikes, and will hopefully get the job done. But I just have that bad feeling that like Bontorin's going to go out there. He's going to use the resets, the long lulls in activity that Kape presents to pressure him, to cut the cage off, to get in on his hips, to get him down, to ground and pound him, to control him, and he'll pick up a decision here. So there you go. Jack Della Maddalena versus Ramazan Emeev. This is a worrying fight just because what we've seen from Jack Della Maddalena has been very, very good. I don't know why I have a hard time with that name. It's been very, very good. He's got an excellent boxing game. I think he has good footwork. He has good speed. He has pretty good power. He puts up a good pace. He throws excellent volume, but have we ever seen him against somebody with the wrestling pressure of Amit? Like, it's not to say that he cannot beat that person. It's just that, like, we are talking about a guy whose biggest wins are Ange Lassa and Pete Rodriguez. There's a lot of question marks on that, and putting him there with Amit could be baiting us into a very boring, clinch heavy, wrestling heavy, control heavy fight, because it's what Amit does. It's what Amit does. It's what he did to David Zawada. It's what he did to Nicholas Stolze. It's what he tried to do to Danny Roberts. It's what he tried to do to Anthony Rocco Martin. It's what he did to Stefan Sekulic, Alberto Mina, Sam Alvey. He's had a bizarrely good record in the UFC, even if a lot of those wins are over people who are in their own way exceptionally flawed. I'm picking Della Maddalena. I'm hoping he's prepared for it. I'm hoping he can use the pocket to land good combinations, to get good strikes in. Amit is hittable. Amit is not incompetent on the feet by any means, but he's not particularly good. So if Della Maddalena can work his range striking game, keep this from being a grinding clinch fest, should be able to get the win. I'm going by decision because Amit is super tough, but there is a potential for a massive stinker here. We got Della Maddalena at minus 135 and plus 115 for Amit. Brandon Allen versus Jacob Malkoun. Jacob Malkoun has surprised me in the UFC. He's done much better than I thought he would do. Because honestly, I didn't think he would win a fight. His debut against Phil Haas, bad. His reasons for being here, being Robert Whittaker's teammate, bad. That almost always works out poorly. But he did beat Razak Al Hassan. He did beat AJ Dobson. Here's the problem, though. AJ Dobson, incredibly flawed fighter. Incredibly green fighter as well. Razak Al Hassan, no cardio, no real process. Kind of small for the weight class. Malkoun is quite small. He's 5'9". You got the 6'2" Brendan Allen in the other corner. Brendan Allen has his own flaws, for sure, but is a reasonably process-driven fighter, a guy who is getting better as a striker, is a fundamentally lethal grappler, is not necessarily the best takedown artist, not necessarily the best control guy. He's more of a scramble guy, someone that you almost underestimate in a lot of ways. Like the Kyle Daukaus fight probably sums him up the best, where it's like Daukaus is like, no, I can grapple with Brendan Allen. And the answer is you probably can't. And like that's the key here, is that Malkoun, the best part of his game, surprisingly enough, for a guy who comes from Australia, comes from a camp that's more known for its kickboxing than its wrestling, the best part of his game is his top control grappling. If he's going to engage in grappling with Brendan Allen, he's probably just going to get submitted. And I'd like to make this fight a lot more complex, but it probably isn't. It's also a fight where Brendan Allen can probably work his stand-up. He's got, what's the reach difference here? Somehow the reach is only 2 inches? I don't believe that. I honestly, fundamentally just don't believe that that's going to be the advantage, because when you're looking at Brendan Allen, I mean, that man is all gangly limbs, and Malkoun's got short arms. And I mean, I guess the key is like super thick torso, I guess, but I don't know. Like, it feels like that reach advantage is going to be way more than 2 inches in practicality. And Allen, like I said, has been looking better as a striker. Allen with a grappling advantage and a striking advantage probably in the same fight. That's hard to pick against. This is really hard to pick against. So, yeah, Brendan Allen. I thought he would be a bigger favorite. He's only minus 255 to the plus 205 of Malkoun. I guess that's not too bad. Then we have Suhu Choi, a.k.a. Korean Sting, versus Joshua Culibao. I really like Joshua Culibao. He's my favorite kind of fighter, a guy who in my opinion, is making more or less the correct decisions at most points of the fight. He has good instincts. He can do a little bit of everything. He can strike. He can grapple. He'll pressure. He'll be aggressive. He's hard to make boring, which is also nice. I think this is going to be a very exciting fight. But unfortunately, like a lot of my favorite fighters, I think Culibao is let down by just raw physicality. It hasn't cost him too bad yet. It's only lost to Jalen Turner, who is an absolute freak. And also, let's be honest, Culibao had no business fighting Jalen Turner at 155. That's just insane. Like, he did manage to make a draw happen with Charles Jourdain. He beat Nuremberg. It was not a bad fighter by any means. So like he's over delivered. He's kind of like Jacob Malkoun, actually, like a guy who came in with like no real expectations, because we're like, okay, he tries really hard. He's in good shape. He does a little bit of everything. He does fight to winning conditions, but he just isn't physically imposing. And the problem here is I think Suhu Choi will make him pay for his need, and to be clear, his need to be high volume and aggressive to make up for that lack of physicality, because Choi's got some scary power and some pretty nice counters. And when I look at the people who have beaten him, Mozar Evlev, Gavin Tucker, Alex Caceres, they're all people who have something that Culibao doesn't have. Size and strength. And yeah, this feels a lot more like his fight with Yusuf Zalal. Not Mokhtarian by any means. Oh God, how the Mokhtarians ever conned the UFC into signing them, I will never really fully understand. But yeah, I am going with Choi here. I think that the counter game is too strong with him. He has good timing, good accuracy. He does have significant defensive issues. Like, he does remind me a lot of Korean Superboy, and it's not just because they're both Korean. It's that him and Doo-Ho Choi, Korean Superboy, it's the same thing. Like, a lot of power, a lot of physicality to their game. But some defensive lapses that Culibao, I think, will escape. Not escape. Exploit. I think we're going to see some things like where Choi just kind of will drop his hands a little bit, kind of inexplicably. I see Culibao punishing for that. But you've got the reach, you've got the height advantage, you've got the power advantage, you got the explosive advantage. Probably you're the fast. He's also the faster fighter. You got to take Korean Sting. It breaks my heart to do it, like, honestly. But yeah, that is kind of the case. It's only an inch and a half of reach advantage, actually. So I was thinking the reach would be more pronounced, but I can also see that. Korean Soap Boy coming in at minus 240 plus 200 for Culibao. Again, all of these are from like just Tapology's odd tracker. You'll find them at different places. I am not going to try and say this guy's first name, because I've not seen anyone even try it. Mahashete is the last name, and he's fighting Steve Garcia. This is a fight where, like, I honestly don't know. Mahashete does look like he has a lot of power. He does look like he has actually a reasonably structured game, although it is wild. He is way too willing to throw jumping strikes and, like, interesting, creative, surprising kicks and knees, except that they aren't really surprising when they're part of your normal striking game. It's kind of like James Irvin's like Superman punch and flying knees back in the day, where it's like, yeah, for a long time this was actually surprising and worked really, really well, but eventually people just are like expecting it. And Steve Garcia, not the most physically imposing fighter, not the best fighter really in any regard, but does have a good volume kickboxing game, does have a wrestling game, does have some grappling credentials. Just kind of a reasonable journeyman test. The sort of thing that, a lot of prospects do their thing against. It's just, I have not seen enough of Mahashete. He looked good on the Contender Series. He beat a fighter that has a little bit of buzz around him. but was also pretty green and unproven. So it's a fight that like I'm open to being proven absolutely wrong on. I could just see his physicality being way too much, his explosiveness, his dynamicism, his creativity being just too much for Steve Garcia. But I'm gonna go with Steve Garcia to just put in like kind of like a Workland like performance, like a lot of volume striking, mix in some takedowns, mix in some top control, do your thing, be the savvy veteran, be the nuanced fighter, and get the job done. But I'm also cheering that I'm wrong because Steve Garcia kind of proven not to really be UFC caliber. And if he wins, that just means that Mahashete isn't either. Whereas if Mahashete wins, maybe we can get a little bit excited about something. I mean, maybe I'm being a little bit too harsh on Steve Garcia. He's only had 2 fights. But, like, I don't know. Having any remote struggles with Charlie Ontiveros is not a good sign. And the loss to Luis Pena, while very understandable because Pena was huge for the weight class and frustratingly a blanket, despite having the nickname Violet Bob Ross, is still a little concerning. I don't know, but that's not how Mahashete fights. So I'm gonna go with Garcia just to have that veteran ability. What were the odds on that fight? I assume I actually with the Contender Series bump, it might be Mahashete. Is it? No. Garcia is the favorite, minus 155, plus 135 for Mahashete. That sounds about right. Jake Matthews versus Andre Fiallo. Just talking about the odds here. Fiallo is a minus 150 favorite. And I'm going to be taking the dog Jake Matthews here at plus 125. So here's the deal. I like Andre Fiallo's game. I like what he's trying to put together. A nice pressure striking game that mixes in some nice counters. Inherently good hand speed. Inherently good timing. Inherently good counter game. The problem is that he doesn't seem to have the confidence to really put it together. And now what I mean by that is when you're pressuring, you're inherently opening gaps in your defensive game that you're masking by being decisive with your striking, making the opponent think about what you're doing offensively so they cannot utilize the gaps in your defense. That is the inherent style, and Fiallo just doesn't seem to have that level of self-belief. Like there's little bits of hesitation, which Baeza did hit him while he hesitated, and so did a fighter that I still don't believe is very good, Cameron Van Camp, were able to utilize. He did win both of those fights. He did finish both those fighters, which again belies the counter part of his game being very, very good. But I think Jake Matthews is kind of forgotten about. Jake Matthews was at one time a really, really good prospect. He's still pretty young. Yes, he lost to Sean Brady, but there's no disrespect in that. And yes, he had problems with Diego Sanchez, which is concerning. But here's the thing. Diego Sanchez, in a fight of his own design, is still actually a fairly good fighter. And that's the thing, is Matthews likes to grapple with people. This is a guy who did comfortably beat Li Jingliang, the Leech. He did beat Emil Weber-Beck, who, yes, was kind of a disappointment in the UFC, didn't have a great time, went 1-3, has lost since, but is a very physically imposing individual and a very powerful fighter. Very powerful striker, I should say. And that's kind of the same thing that Fiallo is doing here. Fiallo is going to come forward. He's going to leave opportunities to hit him. He's going to leave opportunities to get taken down. He's not a particularly good grappler. And I see Jake Matthews picking up the win here. I really, really do. Now, watch Jake Matthews get knocked out in the first round as I'm saying that. And that's definitely a possibility. That is 100% a possibility. But we're talking about a significant step up from Cameron Van Camp here. And Fiallo, I picked him to beat Van Camp. I'm happy he did. But I was immensely not convinced by it. But anyways. And Matthews is a little bit of a guy I have a hard time trusting. There's just some bad decision making in his game. But also, I refuse to believe that Fiallo is 6 feet tall because after his win against Van Camp, he stood next to Brendan Allen. And Brendan Allen, who is supposedly 6'2", and I do believe is actually 6'2", just absolutely towers above him. So there's that. I guess I always have a chronic distrust of people who seem to have like the wrong height. Then we have Kwai Hokang, pardon me, versus Batcherel Danan, or Danan Batcherel. I'm pretty sure it's Danan Batcherel. Pretty sure that's how they pronounce it. I'm going with Danan Batcherel here. Kwai Hokang he's a good fighter. He's actually a surprisingly well-rounded fighter, but he will often not really fight a smart fight. And it's something I'm always going to have a hard time picking him on. Like, he's a guy who was like, no. I will grapple with Rana Yaya. No, you don't do that. He fought more or less Brandon Davis's fight. Won a split decision there. He fought Pyongyang Liu, who I just don't think is very good, and got a draw, and got a split decision in that fight. Fighters who had a very limited pathway to how they were going to be able to fight him, and he wound up barely winning those fights. Now, granted, he also gave a hell of a difficult fight to Ricardo Lamas, so like it's not like he's not capable of, air quotes, rising to the occasion, but there's a lot of people he's fought that just should have been way easier fights for him and were not, because of his decision making. And I think he'll give Batchery, I think it's Batchery actually, the exact fight that he wants, and he'll lose it. Batchery is coming off a loss to Chris Gutierrez, but there's no shame in that. Before that, had quickly eliminated Brandon Davis, Kevin Natividad, and Guido Canetti. I think he's got the power to basically win the exchanges with Kong, even if he doesn't win the exchanges, you know what I'm saying? Like, get hit more, but be the guy who hits way harder and gets the job done. I am legitimately dreading Silvana Gomez Juarez versus Niang Lang. I am. Gomez Juarez has been very disappointing in the UFC. She's been armbarred twice. She has terrible grappling instincts. Liang is not good, but you know what she does have? Armbars. A fair number of them. She's won by 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 armbar wins, including her last 2. It's incredibly reductive reasoning because Gomez Juarez should be the better fighter. She is favored minus 165 to plus 140. But I'm sorry. I just have to go with her falling into an armbar. And that's the fight. There you go. And then also Jocelyn Edwards versus Ramona Pascual. I want to be clear on this. I've seen interviews with Ramona Pascual. She seems like an absolutely lovely, lovely person that I would love to meet, that I would love to have as, like, you know, a friend or as an interview on this podcast. But at the same time, I have to say it, she's not very good. Not on a UFC level. There's a lack of athleticism to her game. There's a lack of coordination, speed, explosiveness. She might be pretty strong for the weight class because she is coming down from 145 to 135. She's a big girl for the weight class, and that might translate into some strength. But like, Edwards' problem is not strength. Edwards' problem is technique. And Pascal doesn't seem to have like super good technique to kind of compensate for that. She's kind of Steve Garcia, but like with size and without like the well put together veteran nuanced game. And part of that is obviously that she's had, I think, 9 fights, 6-3. Yeah. She is training out of Syndicate MMA. They've been doing good things for the most part. But they also haven't really... They hone fighters as opposed to fundamentally changing them, in my opinion. Now, there are exceptions to that. Roxanne Modafferi, in many ways, actually did fundamentally change when going to Syndicate. But, like, you look at Joanne Calderwood, for example, who's, like, kind of the poster child for Syndicate MMA. It's, like, made her better in ways that she was already reasonably good. Same with, like, Daniel Rodriguez. Same with Davey Grant. I didn't know Davey Grant was there, but he is listed on their page. Vince Morales, Jordan Leavitt, O'Day Osborne, like kind of all the same kind of thing where they took someone who needed sharpening and they did it, but they didn't necessarily fundamentally change them. And that's kind of my problem with Pascal here, is that I don't even know what you really sharpen there. I don't know what her A set is supposed to be. I don't know what her path to victory is supposed to be. And while Jocelyn Edwards, like I said, has some significant technical limitations and also fights at a very slow pace, I see her just getting the job done here. She is very strong. She's a physical specimen. And Pascal's debut in the UFC was against Josiane Nunez, who, one is a 5'2" featherweight, but two is kind of the same thing. Kind of slow, kind of power based, kind of very reliant on physicality. And Jocelyn Edwards kind of very much feels the same, even though she lost to Jessica Rose Clark and Cara Hossa. This feels more like her fight with Yanan Wu than it does with Hossa and Clark, who, while very flawed in their own way, are nuanced fighters who have a path to victory. And also in the case of Jessica Rose Clark, does tend to scout people very well. Although there is that confusing fight with Stephanie Edgar where she literally just went into like the one part of Edgar's game that is good. But anyways, that's talking about a fighter that's not even on the card. So yeah, I do have to pick Edwards. She's a minus 170 favorite to the plus 150. This is King's MMA versus Syndicate, so like that's another thing. If I'm extrapolating that Syndicate might make Pascal better, I also have to, at some point say King's MMA has a real history of like taking fighters and making them way better and transforming them. So like if you've got a physical specimen who's a little bit lacking on technical things and fights at a little bit of a slow pace, King's is a great place to be. And on the other hand, I don't really know where I would send Ramona Pascal to do that. Like I said, it does make me feel bad to say that because she does seem like a very nice person. But anyways, that is the picks for UFC 275. Just to quickly recap, going with Procházka, Shevchenko, Joanna Jędrzejczyk, Bontorin, Della Maddalena, Brandon Allen, Korean Sting, Steve Garcia, Jake Matthews, Danan Batshiri, Neon Lang, and Jocelyn Edwards. Some of those I'm not super confident on. Liang would be like a great example of like, I can't trust either fighter in that fight. And like in other cases, like I could easily see Kwai Ho Kang winning that fight, but it involves him not getting caught up in what the other person wants to do, and he just almost always does. And you got people like Jake Matthews and Steve Garcia that I don't have a ton of faith in. And I will be cheering for some people that I'm picking against, like Josh Culibao, who I really, really, really do like. And I'm and Manel Cap. And I'm incredibly dreading Della Mandaleta versus Ramazani Beef. Not because I even think it's going to be a bad fight, but because, oh my lord, can I see it being a bad fight? Anyways, that's UFC 274 from Singapore. Is there anything else I really want to talk about here? Is there anything coming up that is intriguing, that is interesting, not really in the MMA world? So as per usual, check out my Discord, check out Twitter, at Meodred. The Discord link is in the description below, wherever you're watching this, Acast, Anchor, Spotify, YouTube. Might not be there on Spotify, actually, now that I think about that. No, it is there. I do post it there. I'm pretty sure it takes the Anchor description to Spotify. So I do believe it is there. So check that out. Doing simulated MMA fights there all the time. And it's an interesting career mode. It's interesting fun. And I am thinking about doing a Costa Rican deathmatch series on the worst fighters that have ever been created in the sim. That should be fun. So I will talk to you guys later.